Hey guys. Tonight we slip into a time when maps had dragons. Explorers carried more gin than water. And, somehow, fully grown British men mistook a hippo for a mermaid. You find yourself at the edge of a slow, silty river, its surface cloaked in early morning mist. The trees hang low, tangled with vines that look like they might hiss at you if they had the chance. Bugs are doing acrobatics in the damp air. You're wearing high leather boots that squish when you walk. Because of course they do. You stepped into a marsh half an hour ago. The world is still, a little too still, and in the silence, your imagination becomes louder than the jungle itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The river is called something long and lyrical in the local language. But the men you're with don't bother to learn it. They just call it the channel. Or worse, the wet corridor. It's 1843, and you're traveling with a crew of British surveyors, amateur zoologists, and one guy who's here mostly because he got drunk on the docks in Portsmouth and woke up 2 weeks later in Mozambique. It's not long before someone spots a shape breaking the water, wide, round, and shining in the dawn haze. It vanishes just as quickly. No one says much at first. But later, around the mosquito-netted campfire, someone leans back in their canvas chair and mutters, "Looked like a woman, hair and all." Now, was it hair? Or a bramble caught on a rock? No one checks. But once the idea is spoken, it clings. See, this era, the mid-19th century, is a golden age of discovery and also, let's be honest, of absolutely wild speculation. The same decade that brings you Darwin and natural selection also gives you guys earnestly arguing that volcanoes are the mouths of sleeping dragons. Facts are optional. Flair is everything. As you sip your tepid tea and swat something suspiciously leggy off your sleeve, one of the team begins to sketch what they saw, or thought they saw. The pencil squeaks on parchment, and a shape emerges, round face, wide eyes, and, curiously, something that might be tusks or might be very unfortunate earrings. No one questions it. They're too tired, too full of quinine, and besides, the story sounds better this way. The explorer's journal from that day, still held in a museum today, by the way, reads, "We glimpsed a creature of strange feminine aspect, reclining upon a river stone, its hair trailing in the flow. It does not mention the snorting or the part where it yawned wide enough to show 4 rows of molars." Mainstream historical records from the time show a wave of increasingly whimsical sightings around the rivers of sub-Saharan Africa. Explorers, missionaries, and amateur naturalists alike report maidens of the water, always just out of reach, and usually accompanied by very loud splashing sounds. Curiously, these sounds tend to align with known hippo migratory paths. One lesser-known journal from a Portuguese trader even describes a river goddess with teeth like a lion. Scholars debate whether this was simply a metaphor or a moment of honest misidentification. Historians still argue whether these early references were genuine cultural translations or just European confusion with a side of colonial arrogance. You're beginning to see the pattern. If it glows, shimmers, or even briefly resembles a human shape, it's a mermaid. And if someone drank too much rum before breakfast, well, now it's a seductive mermaid. Your own boots sink into the thick riverside mud as the men argue over how many mermaids might be nesting nearby. One suggests they leave a gift, a mirror tied to a tree, for the creature to admire herself. Another says they should sing, because everyone knows mermaids like music. No one questions why a creature in an African freshwater river would respond to sea shanties. But you're tired. And the hippos? They're watching from the reeds. Barely visible, large, bored, and, at least for now, not impressed. The air grows thicker as dusk settles in. Fireflies blink. Frogs begin their nightly sermon. You stretch out on your canvas roll and glance once more at the sketch someone left near the fire. Big eyes, flowing locks, and, let's be honest, hips that suggest this mermaid might have 4 legs and a tail. But the mist swirls, and you find yourself staring longer than you intended. Was it just a hippo? Was it? You wake up to the squelch of boots in mud and the unmistakable sound of someone panicking over breakfast tea. The sun has barely crested the horizon, but camp is already buzzing with excitement, or at least confusion. A shout rings out from the shoreline. It's back. Naturally, you follow. The morning is cool, the mist thinner now, but the air still clings to your skin like a damp shirt. Down by the water, a cluster of explorers, most in rumpled coats and half-laced boots, are pointing to a ripple far out on the river. It could be a floating log. It could be a boulder. But to this particular group of men, all half-starved for wonder and 3 weeks past their last decent sleep, it's unmistakably a mermaid, or, more specifically, the same one from yesterday. You squint, the shape dips, rolls, and disappears again, leaving a wake that's not very ladylike. One of the younger naturalists, eager to impress, scribbles feverishly in his field notebook. Undulating movements observed, torso sleek, large-eyed, possibly playful. You do your best not to point out the snort that came just before the creature submerged. Back at the fire pit, the explorers compare theories. It may be an undiscovered aquatic hominid, says one, perhaps a subspecies of siren, suggests another. They toss around names like Homo nympha aquatica with an ease that makes you deeply suspicious. One man claims the creature was singing. Another swears it had hands. A third just sighs, looks around at the mosquito bites covering everyone's necks, and mutters, or it was just a really ugly fish. One thing's certain, this is no longer just a weird sighting. It's a story in the making. And stories, especially in the 19th century, are currency. They earn prestige, invitations to lecture halls, and, if you're really lucky, a mention in the London Illustrated News. In fact, a quick look through their archives shows that in the 1840s, nearly a dozen articles referenced strange mer creatures seen in African and South American rivers. One particularly bold writer described them as possessing the breasts of women, the cry of a goat, and the tail of a lion. You have to admire the imagination. Or maybe worry about it. Out comes the sketchbook again. The men take turns describing what they saw. The creature gets larger with every sentence. First, it was 5 feet long. Then 6. Then, at least 10. With glowing eyes, and an aura of sorrow. No one can agree on the shape of its mouth, though one man insists it was smiling seductively. Meanwhile, a hippo, very real, very large, surfaces about 50 feet upstream and lets out a bellow loud enough to make 2 men drop their tea mugs. It's practically waving at them. But no, that's not what they saw. Too obvious, too muddy, not magical enough. This is how myths grow, one ripple at a time. One odd shadow misremembered, one tale seen in the half-light of dawn and colored in with fantasy by sunset. There's a fringe report from a Belgian explorer during this period who claimed to have found hippo footprints with webbed toes and feminine curvature. That same report also included a note that his spectacles had been broken for 3 weeks. Which perhaps explains a lot. Historians still argue whether the man was genuinely delusional or just writing what his sponsors wanted to hear. You watch the scene unfold like a slow-burning comedy of errors. A map is spread out. "We'll mark the sighting here," says the captain, drawing a small seashell icon on the river bend. "And if we see it again, we'll triangulate the pattern." Ah yes, the old, triangle the mermaid, strategy. Flawless. Nearby, one explorer starts crafting a trap, a net, some dried fish, and a carved piece of ivory shaped like a comb. He insists mermaids are vain and won't be able to resist combing their hair. You remind him that what you all saw had no visible fingers. Much less a vanity complex. He shrugs. You never know. This is the curious thing about these expeditions. For all the talk of science and documentation, what most of these men really want is a good story. They're deep in unfamiliar territory. Their boots ruined, their nerves frayed, their bodies riddled with bug bites, and if something shimmering emerges from the water, then by the queen's whiskers, they'll call it a mermaid. Later that night, as the camp winds down and someone tunes a badly weathered violin, the stories continue. This time, the creature has a necklace of reeds. Another version claims she waved. One particularly poetic fellow says he made eye contact and felt a profound sadness. You sip from a dented flask and look out over the river. Now calm under the moonlight. It's hard not to get caught in it, the lure of the fantastical. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the ordinary world isn't all there is. You lie back, eyes tracing the stars, and for just a moment, you let yourself believe. Then something grunts, loudly, wetly. A hippo, barely 10 feet away, stares at you with the blank, judgmental eyes of a creature who's tired of being mistaken for anything else. You apologize, quietly, just in case. By now, the river has become the expedition's most talked about character, sometimes a goddess, sometimes a trickster, and often a silent accomplice to imagination gone mildly feral. The men have taken to calling it Miss Temptation, as if bestowing it a name might make its mysteries more cooperative. This morning, you're crouched beside the lead cartographer, a meticulous man named Whitmore who insists on inking every squiggle of coastline with a ruler, even if it's just a smudge from a teacup. He's decided to immortalize the site of yesterday's mermaid sighting with a faint curl in the map. Labeled in delicate cursive, probable aquatic entity, female form. It's absurd. It's also somehow very official. Whitmore is no fool, but he's a dreamer dressed as a bureaucrat. You watch him draw the river's curve, glance once over the water, and then sketch a small figure along the bank, a silhouette. Long-haired, arms upraised, almost prayerful. Suppose she returns, he murmurs, as if this is something mermaids are known for, keeping appointments. You ask him, lightly, if he's ever seen a real hippo up close. Oh, of course, he says, tapping his pen against the edge of his compass. Beastly things. No poetry in them. None at all. And there it is. The reason no one wants to say the word hippo. It's just not romantic. A hippo doesn't lure you into dreams. A hippo doesn't get you published in the Edinburgh Review. But a mermaid? A river spirit? That gets you dinner invitations in London. The rest of the crew isn't much different. They've taken to patrolling the riverbank with opera glasses. You overhear one man debating whether the creature's tail shimmered, opalescent, or more of a mother of pearl. Another has brought out a butterfly net, because when logic fails, whimsy must take over. Suddenly, a splash. Not far off, something large breaks the surface. You sprint to the edge with the others. A wide brown form rises, massive, glistening, blunt-nosed, and lets out a cavernous yawn. It's a hippo. A textbook one. You count the teeth, and you're pretty sure the thing could eat half the camp in one bite if it felt especially cheeky. But does this settle the debate? Of course not. It's a decoy, someone says, sent by the creature to throw us off. Another leans in close and whispers. That might have been the male. The female's subtler. You have to admire the dedication. A fringe tidbit floats to mind. In 1842, a London scientist reportedly mistook a dried manatee skull for that of a sea princess. The paper was quietly withdrawn when a sailor identified it correctly, though not before the scientist had already commissioned a full oil portrait reconstruction, complete with seashell bra. Historians still argue whether the entire debacle was satire or simply wishful thinking wrapped in Victorian science. As the sun climbs higher, Whitmore returns to his map, carefully drawing the position of the latest sighting. This time, The figure he adds has arms and a flute. You suggest this might be excessive. Artistic license. He replies. Unfazed. You begin to understand that cartography in this era is only part science. The rest is part folklore, part politics, and at least one part fever dream. If it helps sell the expedition to a royal committee or impresses a sponsor back in Bristol, it goes on the map. That night, while the crickets begin their nightly orchestra and the campfire burns low, someone unpacks a harmonium and begins to play. The melody is uncertain, wheezy, but oddly sweet, a tune meant for coaxing dreams, or perhaps for summoning imaginary water maidens. You lie on your back again, watching the smoke curl skyward, and listen to the men muse about what she might be doing now, this mysterious mer creature of theirs. One says she's watching from the reeds. Another says she only appears when the stars align just so. The hippo from earlier reappears with a loud snort and a swampy plop. This time, no one even blinks. They're too deep into the myth. It's become clear now. The mermaid is no longer just a possible discovery. She's a character. A story co-written by each weary explorer and etched into Whitmore's ever-expanding map. Her presence is both real and not, shaped by ripples, shadows, and the soft need to believe in something lovely out here, where the bugs are aggressive and the food tastes mostly like despair. You think back to an older expedition, perhaps you read it once, where a French captain claimed to have spotted nymphs bathing at dawn, in what we now know was a manatee migration route. He was so certain, he tried to catch one with a net made from lace curtains. It failed, obviously, but his journals remain delicate, decorated, and entirely sincere. The line between truth and tale here is as thin as the morning fog. And that's exactly where you're drifting now. Into a sleep where hippos hum lullabies and mermaids yawn. You're not exactly sure who decided that early morning was the right time for rum. But it's become an unspoken tradition among the expedition now. One tottering glass before the day begins. A toast to the creature. They say, for courage, for inspiration, for science, or something close enough to it. The binoculars, meanwhile, are doing more work than the field guides. Everyone's peering into the reeds. The river bends, and sometimes, confusingly, into the sky. In case the mermaid has taken to flight, you sit beside a sun-creased explorer named Barrow, who insists his lenses are calibrated to spot the faintest glimmer of tail. You peer through them. You see ripples, leaves, a few dragonflies that look weirdly confident. You hand them back. This morning's toast is to the Water Lady. Someone has scratched that title into the mess tin now used as the camp's honorary goblet. The rum is warm and smells faintly of rope and cloves. One sip, and you understand why someone mistook a hippo for a goddess. Reality just gets softer at the edges. As the fog lifts, the river opens itself to inspection. A hippo surfaces with its usual snort and a spray of water from its nostrils. You swear it's getting bolder, maybe even amused. It stares directly at you, blinks twice, and then gracefully submerges like a queen exiting a ballroom. Did you see the way she turned? Someone gasps. That was intentional. You chew your lip. The day continues with little activity apart from increasingly embellished discussions. Someone proposes building a flute from river reeds to summon her. Another begins drafting a formal greeting in Latin. In case she's educated, there is even talk of leaving a gift. Perhaps the silver pocket watch no one trusts to keep time anymore. You wonder if sleep deprivation is contagious. Still, a notebook emerges again, and this time, the group decides to write a collaborative account of their encounters so far. You listen as the lines are composed aloud. Her eyes held the melancholy of 1,000 drowned stars. Her back shimmered like moonlight over silk. Her voice, though never heard, was somehow always present. You suggest including the part where she grunted like an ox and launched a small log onto the riverbank. They decline. One explorer, a man named Clive with a monocle permanently smudged, begins theorizing about her diet. Clearly herbivorous, he says, tapping a cigar against his boot. But perhaps fond of wild orchids or mangoes. Something fragrant. He goes on to describe how one might court her. Ideally with poetry or a gift of fresh linens. This is when the rum bottle makes another round. There's a scholarly tidbit tucked away in the archives of the Royal Geographical Society where a similar expedition once described mammalian river spirits, seen in Madagascar. Complete with wide mouths and gentle, rhythmic snorting. Historians still argue whether that was a mistranslation, a metaphor, or just someone watching a hippo exhale at sunset. You think about the reality these men are walking through, the heat, the bugs, the strange food, the boredom stretched thin over weeks of travel. And how, in the middle of that, something strange and half-seen gives shape to wonder. A story becomes a shield. A myth becomes a mirror. And suddenly, everyone feels a little less lost. By evening, someone pulls out an old opera libretto and suggests composing a ballad. Another, no less serious, carves a small figurine, half woman, half fish, with an odd little snout that looks suspiciously like a pig's. He insists it's faithful to the original sighting. You notice he's used one of the ivory buttons from his coat as an eye. You're unsure whether to admire the craftsmanship or the commitment to delusion. The river reflects the stars now. A hush falls over camp. Even the hippos seem to be holding their breath. You hear only the soft plunk of water dripping from leaves and the occasional sleepy shuffle of someone repositioning under their netting. You think back to your arrival, boots soaked, map half-inked, and a yawning hippo everyone pretended not to see. Now, 3 days later, she has a name, a backstory, a favorite flower, and an entire folder of sketches. You smile, because you know what? It's kind of beautiful. You drift off to the sound of distant humming, someone trying to write her a lullaby. And somewhere in the shallows, a real hippo stretches its jaw, lets out a sleepy huff, and settles into the muddy cradle of the river, utterly indifferent to its legend. Morning breaks to the comforting clatter of teacups and the slightly less comforting discovery that someone's charcoal drawings have melted into the expedition's field logs during the night's humidity. You watch as Whitmore peels apart the sticky pages with the delicacy of a man separating treasure from tragedy. At the center of the smudged chaos, her, or rather, it, the sketch, even in its half-blurred state, the image retains its charm. You see a long torso, generously curved in ways that suggest more imagination than anatomy. The lower half ends in something like a fish's tail, or perhaps it's just water damage. What's unmistakable, though, are the two round tusks that frame her mouth like unfortunate accessories. Someone suggests they're earrings. Another insists they're horns of water wisdom. No one dares suggest the obvious. You sit down next to the artist, a quiet man named Winslow who spends most of his days with a sketchbook on one knee and a look of perpetual surprise on his face. He's redrawn the creature several times now, sometimes with a smile, sometimes looking wistfully into the distance like a soap opera heroine. She changes, he mutters. Each time I remember her. She's different. You ask how he remembers something he only saw for 3 seconds and from half a football field away. I felt her, he replies, solemnly. Right. Still, Winslow's drawings begin to take on lives of their own. Copies are passed around. One of them ends up pinned to the canvas wall of the supply tent. Like a poster, someone tapes another to the rum crate, and another ends up inside someone's Bible, right between Psalms and Proverbs. By midday, the sketch has evolved. Now she has hair, lots of it, braided down to her lower back, with river flowers tucked behind one ear. The tusks are gone, replaced by subtle lips. The artist calls this version, Riverine Muse No. 3. You assume there were 2 less glamorous prototypes. Oddly, no one is mocking this. It's taken on the tone of something halfway between worship and wishful thinking. Winslow begins drafting a full profile, weight, uncertain, height, taller when upright, Diet, unknown but possibly vegetarian. And behaviors, emerges with moonlight. Attracted to music. And averse to brass instruments. You wonder how long before someone tries to categorize her taxonomically. Probably by dinner. There's a strange comfort in this act of creation. It's as if giving the unknown a face, however inaccurate, makes the heat more bearable. The uncertainty less biting. The jungle, after all, is a place of overwhelming sensory noise. Everything buzzes, bites, or blooms at the wrong time. Making art of it all gives the illusion of order. There's even precedent for this. In the 1830s, a French illustrator working from verbal reports created the first full, scientific rendering of a supposed South American mermaid. The resulting image looked more like a goat that had fallen into a well. But it made the rounds in intellectual circles anyway. Historians still argue whether it was satire, sincere, or simply well-funded fantasy. You return to your own notebook and try to jot down your thoughts, only to realize that your pen is leaking and your last 3 pages are now permanently illustrated with what appears to be a bloated river cow. Accurate, at least. Later, Winslow shares his latest piece, a full-body portrait in dramatic shading, featuring the creature reclining on a stone, chin resting delicately on one webbed hand. The tail has scaled embellishments, like armor. In the distance, a small canoe drifts by, its oars abandoned, the lone rower captivated. Artistic liberty, he explains. You glance at the hippo tracks along the riverbank. You've seen the mud-caked beasts loll in the shallows like oversized potatoes. And yet, this vision of an elegant guardian of the waters? It's hard not to root for it. Even the skeptics soften. One explorer, previously dismissive, now offers a theory that perhaps she's a totemic echo, not an animal or person, but a projection of collective yearning. You'd ask what that means. But he's mid-swig of rum and muttering something about Jungian archetypes that haven't even been invented yet. The day ends with a flurry of page turning as the group crowds around Winslow's open sketchpad by lantern light. They offer critiques like art critics at a gallery. The nose is too blunt. Add more glisten to the tail. She'd never sit like that, it's undignified. No one mentions that the original creature had a head the size of a wagon wheel and the grace of a toppling boulder. You lie down as the fire crackles low, listening to the rustle of pages and the occasional snore. And just before sleep takes you, you swear you see movement near the river, something round and glistening. A gentle ripple expanding outward. You smile to yourself. It's probably just a hippo. Probably. You rise early the next morning. Not from the call of duty, but from the sound of distant laughter, genuine, amused, and distinctly not British. When you wander over to investigate, you find several local villagers standing around the camp's improvised art exhibit, Winslow's latest sketch of the riverine muse, freshly pinned to a tree with what used to be someone's tent peg. They're pointing at the drawing, then at the river, then back at the drawing. Then they erupt in warm, hushed laughter again. You approach, curious. One man, wrapped in a worn cotton shawl dyed the color of marigolds, gestures toward the sketch. He speaks softly, with a mix of Kiswahili and another tongue you can't place. The translator, who doubles as the camp's cook and occasionally as the expedition's moral compass, summarizes with a grin. He says, "It's your rice thief." You blink. "I'm sorry?" The cook chuckles. "Yes, the one who comes at night. Big mouth, round body, eats everything." There's a pause while this registers. You glance back at the sketch, graceful figure, wistful gaze, tail like a brocade curtain. The cook, still chuckling, adds, "They mean the hippo." And just like that, the house of cards wobbles. The majestic, enigmatic, seductive river being is a well-known pest. Local farmers have names for her, not poetic ones. Either. Mokabi, one man says, patting his belly with emphasis. It loosely translates to, she who eats too much and never apologizes. You learn that these villagers have coexisted with the hippos for generations. They know their temperaments, their migration routes, their favorite bathing spots, and no one, is mistaking them for mermaids. You ask if any stories exist about water spirits, something closer to the creature in Winslow's sketch. The elder nods. Yes, he says, there are river spirits, but they do not look like this. They are usually invisible. When they do appear, they shimmer like fish scales and speak only to children or animals. Not a single one has ever worn braids or leaned seductively on a rock. Historians still argue whether early European explorers genuinely misunderstood native folklore, or whether they chose to replace it with something more palatable to their own imaginations. What's clear is that somewhere along the riverbanks of Africa, actual legends were drowned beneath imported fantasies. One man, a tall fellow with a gap-toothed grin, points at Winslow's sketch again and mimes a snorting sound so accurate that you'd swear a hippo had just spoken. The camp bursts out laughing. Even Winslow smiles. Barely. Then quietly turns his sketchpad over. You find yourself wondering, how many stories were born this way? A slip of the tongue. A misunderstanding. An overactive imagination meeting a quiet nod of amusement from someone who knows better but doesn't feel like correcting the guest. Because sometimes, it's easier to let the visitor dream. Later, you walk with one of the elders along a quiet trail, past vines heavy with dew and trees whispering in a breeze that feels like breath. He tells you a story, one he insists is true. A long time ago, he says, a hunter waited by the river all night hoping to catch a spirit. He left honey, flowers, and his best walking stick. In the morning, the gifts were gone. In their place, a heap of dung and a very smug-looking hippo in the shallows. Still, the old man says with a wink. Some say she smiled. Back at camp, Whitmore has added a local interpretation column to his maps, listing possible native names for the creature. You suggest Mokabi. He writes it down, carefully, next to Riverine Mews number 4. In the afternoon, the villagers share roasted yams and a gourd of something fermented and deeply suspicious. The explorers accept with cautious smiles. Someone proposes a toast to interspecies diplomacy. One child, maybe 8 years old, offers you a reed carving. It's a squat, lumpy thing with short legs, wide jaws, and what might be a flower tucked behind one ear. You ask what it is. She says, it's the spirit who eats our mangoes. You nod solemnly. A powerful spirit indeed. That evening, the hippos return. Not many, just 2 or 3. One lumbers into view with the proud indifference of a royal procession. You swear she makes eye contact with the cook, who nods back like they've had this conversation before. There is no mystery in her movements. No shimmer. No song. Just presence. And in that presence, something undeniably majestic. You sit on the edge of your bedroll and wonder if maybe the magic was never in the mistake, but in how the mistake made people look harder, dream wider, laugh together. The villagers wave goodnight. The sketches are packed away. And the hippo? She rests in the river like a queen in her court, massive, mud-speckled, and entirely unconcerned with your artistic license. It's evening again. The sky is bruised purple and gold, and the camp is quieter than usual. Someone's managed to make a stew that doesn't taste like regret, and the men are lingering over bowls, bellies full and minds, finally, turning reflective. That's when Whitmore brings up the dugong. You pause, spoon halfway to your mouth. The sea cow, he says, swirling the last of his tea. Manatees, dugongs, those gentle, aquatic pillows. You know they were once mistaken for mermaids too? The others lean in. He's right, of course. Back in the days of sailing ships and scurvy, lonely sailors drifting near the West Indies or the coast of East Africa would spot a curvy gray figure gliding under the surface, its body swaying gently with the current. A flick of a tail, a shadow of a hand, though not quite. And just like that, romance happened, or something like it. You suppose it made sense in context. Sailors were months at sea, with nothing to keep them company but rats, rum, and whatever barnacles grew on their feet. A vaguely human-shaped blur in the waves? That became the stuff of sonnets. There's a well-known account from Christopher Columbus himself. In 1493, he wrote of seeing mermaids near the Dominican coast, described them as not half as beautiful as they are painted. Historians now believe he was looking at manatees, possibly squinting, possibly drunk. Historians still argue whether such accounts were based on hallucination, self-deception, or simply the desperate hope for a distraction that didn't snort seawater. What they don't argue about is that the mermaids of early exploration weren't the graceful redheads of Disney dreams. They were, more often than not, fleshy sea mammals misinterpreted with help from distance, heat haze, and wishful thinking. Back in your own camp, Winslow starts sketching again, this time cross-referencing old sailor tales with the creature from the river. The hybrid he produces is bold. It has the chin of a woman, the belly of a manatee, and the tail of a fish that's definitely been skipping leg day. Someone hangs it beside the cook tent with the label, Dugandria serenata, probable freshwater variant. No one questions it. That's the beauty of this moment in time. The age of exploration isn't just about finding new lands. It's about filling in the blank spaces on the map, with facts, guesses, and often, seductive nonsense. If you say something with enough confidence, and a Latin name, someone back in Europe will believe you. Especially if it involves a hint of danger and a sprinkling of allure. It helps, of course, that Victorian society is in the middle of a full-blown mermaid obsession. Sea nymphs graced paintings, perfume bottles, fashion plates. There's even a traveling exhibit featuring the infamous Fiji mermaid, a grotesque mashup of monkey torso and fishtail, preserved in a jar and trotted across country fairs like a sideshow prize. Back home, respectable gentlemen sip tea beside their wives and discuss the virtues of water maidens, delicate, mysterious, and conveniently unable to speak English. You're not surprised that your sketch has now gained a ribbon of poetry below it. Written in delicate cursive, she rose from the deep with eyes like the dawn, a whisper of scales and a sigh nearly gone. The camp is so deep into this romantic fog that no one notices the very real hippo lumbering within 30 feet of the latrine trench that evening. It huffs once, then waddles away, unimpressed. There's a fringe account from a Scottish explorer in 1854 who wrote, "We beheld a nymph whose expression conveyed pity for our mortal limits." The accompanying field notes, however, refer to the same nymph uprooting a tree and defecating beside the rowboat. A detail quietly left out of the lecture circuit. Naturally. Still, you can't help but marvel at how myth clings to us. Even now, in a camp full of educated men with binoculars, maps, and field journals, fantasy slips through like smoke. The hippo has tusks and clomps like a tank in mud, but under the right lighting, at the right distance, with the right amount of wine, she becomes poetry. You're beginning to understand the appeal. The creature is untouchable, mysterious. You can't argue with her. You can't disappoint her. She doesn't judge. She doesn't need. She simply exists, powerful, glimmering, indifferent, safe, in a strange way. That night, around the fire, Whitmore proposes a theory. Perhaps we're not projecting a woman onto the water. He muses, but our own need to see something other, something beautiful in the wild. The camp falls silent. Then someone belches. The moment passes. Still, you carry that thought with you as you lie back and watch the moon drift across the sky. Out on the river, there's movement, a slow, wide ripple. Probably a hippo. Almost certainly a hippo. But then again, maybe not. The morning is unusually still. The river lies flat and glassy, as if holding its breath. You sit near the edge, swatting at a slow mosquito. Your boots drying in the sun after an unexpected misstep in yesterday's mud. The expedition feels quiet today, less frantic, more reflective. The sketches have been tucked away. The rum bottle mysteriously absent from breakfast. It's the perfect moment, someone says, to piece it all together. So you do. Around the breakfast fire, someone rolls out a faded canvas and begins placing the pieces like a puzzle. The sightings, the drawings, the tales from the locals, the suspiciously poetic journals. A dozen different fragments, each a little off, a little embellished, and each firmly pointing to something that almost, but not quite, resembles truth. It's astonishing, really, how quickly a moment can become myth. Start with one shadow, add a splash, stir in exhaustion, foreign air, and a well-timed snort from the bushes. Top it with a desperate craving for wonder. And voila! You've got yourself a mermaid. It's a common tale, across centuries and continents. Creatures of the in-between, part human, part animal, have surfaced in stories wherever people lived near water. Slavic rusalki, Caribbean mami wata, Japanese ningyo, often beautiful, sometimes terrifying, always mysterious. But here's the thing most explorers missed. The locals never confused them with animals. To them, river spirits were spirits, unseen, symbolic. They didn't draw them with mammary glands or harp music. That particular version? That's imported. British, French, Dutch, somewhere between Shakespeare and sugar plantations. Mermaids became less like metaphors and more like misplaced pin-up girls. Historians still argue whether the 19th century obsession with hybrid creatures was the result of cultural displacement or just another flavor of colonial romanticism. One paper even suggests it was tied to Europe's Victorian anxiety about female power. The mermaid, after all, is often both alluring and fatal. A beautiful danger you can't quite explain. You think of Winslow's sketch again. That tail, it curves like calligraphy. Too elegant for a hippo. Too symmetrical. But as you watch the river now, you realize, real tails don't glide like that. They flop. They churn. They throw mud with every shift. Hippos, when they dive, look less like dancers and more like overturned sofas. Still, no one wants to admit they misjudged a hippo. So instead, the expedition does what any respectable group of gentlemen would do in the face of mounting evidence and increasing absurdity. They rationalize. Someone proposes the idea that mermaids might not be a distinct species but a behavioral phase in aquatic mammals. Perhaps, he suggests with a straight face, certain hippos adopt humanoid traits under lunar influence. Another adds, maybe we caught her in a transitional form, between spirit and beast. You nod thoughtfully while chewing on a piece of dried yam that tastes like an eraser. A naturalist named Harris pulls out a weathered journal and begins to draft a formal report. His writing style is flowery, his logic questionable, but his commitment unshakable. Observed along eastern tributary, a semi-humanoid aquatic form, pale-skinned, partial tail, likely amphibious, displayed rhythmic surfacing, suggestive of breath control, appeared briefly to acknowledge observers. Submerged without trace. You suggest he add that the creature also yawned loudly and sneezed. He declines. Later that day, the group decides to revisit the original sighting location. You walk in a line along the riverbank, swishing through reeds, swatting flies, listening for the telltale plop that launched 1,000 words. Nothing. Until, there, a flicker, a ripple, the water parts briefly, and a familiar, squat silhouette emerges. She yawns again, wide, toothy, and unashamed, before blowing a noseful of water in your general direction and vanishing beneath the surface. It is, unmistakably, gloriously, a hippo. This time, no one gasps, no one sketches. Instead, Barrow raises one eyebrow, sips from his canteen, and mutters, "Well, she's in a mood today." And just like that, she remains a mermaid, not because of what she is, but because of what everyone wants her to be. You think about another story. One whispered around campfires in the American South. Sailors who swore they saw ladies of the sea near New Orleans, only to describe them in terms that matched local manatees almost exactly. The reports were published, poems were penned, and a small statue still stands near a marina. Mistakes don't always get corrected. Sometimes, they become traditions. You walk back to camp that evening feeling oddly peaceful. The mystery isn't solved, exactly, but it's no longer urgent. It's part of the air now, something shared, reshaped, and gently released. Winslow adds one last sketch to his book before turning in. It's less detailed than the others. No flowing hair, no delicate nose, just a large, sleepy creature half submerged, eyes closed, tail curled gently in the current. Underneath, he writes, "She was not what we thought, but she was watching all along." And somehow, that feels like enough. The jungle at night does strange things to your senses. Sounds bounce from everywhere and nowhere, the slow splash of water, the high-pitched whine of insects, the distant rustle of something large moving through leaves with the grace of a drunk librarian. The air clings like damp linen, and the moon tonight is too full, too bright. It turns the river silver, the shadows sharp, and the reeds into trembling silhouettes that move when you're sure they shouldn't. And so, naturally, someone sees her again. "Did you hear that?" Barrow whispers, grabbing your arm hard enough to make your elbow pop. She surfaced. You follow his gaze to the far bank where the water ripples softly. There's nothing out of the ordinary, just reeds swaying, water lapping, but then, something bobs up, round, smooth, shiny in the moonlight. Barrow exhales like he's seen an angel. That's her head. See the way it glistens? You nod slowly, trying not to laugh. It is shiny, also hippo-sized, also emitting low, rhythmic snorts that sound distinctly unladylike. But no one dares say it aloud. In fact, the camp is buzzing with whispered declarations. Someone claims they heard her humming, like a lullaby. But, wetter, another swears he saw her blink slowly. Twice, then wink. It's moonlight madness, and everyone's catching it. You sit with Winslow, who's working on what he calls a nocturnal impressionistic rendering. It's all shadow and curve, moon-drenched lines and speculative anatomy. In this version, her eyes are wide and liquid, her shoulders bare, her arms curling above her like she's mid-dance. It's oddly elegant, if wildly inaccurate. "I didn't draw what I saw," he says. "I drew what I felt." That about sums it up. This isn't new. If you look back far enough, almost every culture has a version of this, the moon-drenched, water-haunting beauty who appears just when your grip on reality begins to melt. Japanese fishermen claim to see Ningyo during full moons. Shimmering figures with fish-like features and human hair, who cried like infants when caught. Slavic folklore warns of rusalki, water spirits who sing to young men, luring them to drown in river shallows. Often, the stories begin with a glimmer, a lull in the air, and a moment of too much belief. Historians still argue whether these tales were protective myths to keep children from dangerous waters, or subconscious echoes of grief and longing. Either way, they have power, especially when the moonlight glows just wrong enough to suggest something impossible could be true. At this point, no one's asking whether she's real. They're wondering why she came back. You try to break the tension by joking that maybe she forgot her toothbrush. Barrow doesn't laugh. He's too busy scribbling. Confirmed second appearance, possibly intentional, in the expedition log. There's a sudden splash, louder this time. All heads swivel. Something large moves through the reeds, making the water slosh with purpose. Then silence. You can hear your own heartbeat. Also, someone's spoon dropping into their stew tin. Whitmore mutters, "She's watching." Then the smell hits you. It's not floral. It's not mystical. It's deeply biological. The same earthy, pungent stench you've come to associate with one specific animal that defecates like it's throwing a party. One of the locals chuckles from behind a tree and mutters, "Mokabi again," then walks off to bed. Still, No one moves. No one wants to be the first to say, "That was a hippo," because if they do, the magic breaks. Instead, they linger in the half-truth, the maybe dream. The edge of belief is soft and warm, and no one wants to leave it just yet. Someone pulls out a flute, poorly tuned, carved from a stick, and begins playing. The melody is hesitant, rising and falling like the river itself. A lullaby to a myth. And then, beneath that gentle music, you hear it. Not a splash, not a song. A grunt. Loud, wet, decidedly nasal. The spell shatters. A hippo, unmistakable in the moonlight, walks out of the water, stops 10 feet from the camp's edge, yawns to show all her molars, and then slowly squats in a very unceremonious manner. You all watch in silence, as if this is still somehow magical. Then she leaves. Not a glance back, just a ripple, some displaced mud, and the lingering scent of realism. There's a long pause. Then Winslow, without a hint of irony, whispers, "She was angry. We must have offended her." You stare at him, and for a brief moment, you wonder, are you the one who's lost it? But then someone else nods sagely and says, "Yes, perhaps the flute was in the wrong key." And just like that, it's decided. The creature returned, judged the music unworthy, and left. Not because she's a hippo. Not because she's incapable of human emotion. But because the legend must go on. You lie down under your netting and watch the moon flicker through the canopy. The river settles again. Somewhere, a real hippo sleeps in a muddy cradle, unaware, or uncaring, that she's now the star of a narrative far grander than her appetite. And you? You smile, because you finally get it. This isn't about accuracy. It's about wonder. And in the half-light between what is and what might be. She swims on. You're back at camp the next afternoon when the mail pouch arrives. It's a battered leather thing, crusted with dust and tied shut with what looks suspiciously like an old shoelace. Inside, dry biscuits, a letter from a botanist who once fell in love with a fern. And, most importantly, a reply from the Royal Geographical Society in London. Whitmore reads it aloud, standing like he's about to deliver a sermon. Your observations on the fluvial humanoid entity are received with tremendous interest. Please submit all related drawings, descriptions, and data for publication in the quarterly report. Priority will be given to accounts with measurements, dietary inferences, and reproductive hypotheses. There's a long pause after that last phrase. Someone coughs. Barrow whispers, "Reproductive hypotheses?" Winslow turns bright red. But it's official. London wants a mermaid. Or, at the very least, a river creature with potentially humanoid tendencies and soft tissue of some complexity. Which, to be fair, describes several explorers in this very camp, especially after too much yam wine. Still, the crew is ecstatic. A real publication, recognition, the kind of thing you bring up at parties when someone asks what you did during your time in Africa. The group scrambles into action. Sketches are recopied, field notes edited, and measurements invented with the flair of a novelist and the confidence of a man who once mistook a mango for an egg-laying lizard. The narrative is polished until it shines, poetic where it must be, vague where it needs to be, and always leaning just close enough to plausibility to pass. In one especially bold section, they write, "The creature's chest appeared to display bilateral curvature consistent with mammalian development. Though obscured by moisture and vegetation, hair-like filaments extended from its crown. Behavior was docile, even inquisitive. You suggest replacing chest with torso. But they accuse you of being too clinical. This is fieldwork and storytelling." Whitmore reminds you, don't sand down the soul of the sighting. Meanwhile, the locals, who've been watching all this unfold with bemused patience, continue to refer to the creature as Mokabi, and continue to insist she's been around for generations. Mostly to eat melons and chase crocodiles off the shoreline. They do not comment on her supposed hair-like filaments. In the evenings, The expedition becomes something between a press room and a theater troupe. Someone composes music to accompany the reading of the final report. Another begins work on a watercolor, for future lithography. Even the cook joins in, carving a figurehead from firewood that looks like a cross between Aphrodite and a butter churn. And then, just when the feverish creativity seems to have peaked, she returns. Or something does. This time, it's late. The moon is shy, hiding behind clouds. The fire is low. Most of the men are half asleep, bellies full of breadfruit stew. When a sudden splash breaks the quiet, you all rush to the riverbank, lanterns swinging, eyes wide. There, midstream, a shape, huge and smooth, floating just beneath the surface. It rises, and for a moment, just one, there's a glint. Not eyes, not a smile, just water sliding off rounded skin, lit by lantern fire. Then a grunt, low, guttural, familiar. Then it disappears. No drawing this time, no poem, just silence. Because this time, even the most committed believers know. It was her, but it was also, very clearly, absolutely, undeniably, a hippo. Still, no one says it, no one has to. The moment has already been printed, immortalized in sketches and prose and half-true measurements. London is already waiting. Reputations are already forming. And as you all turn back to camp, there's no disappointment, only acceptance. The myth lives now, not in the river, but in the story. There's an old explorer's adage, if the truth won't publish, let the poetry do the work. You understand it now. Back in London, the quarterly prints the report in full. The accompanying illustration shows a sleek creature, reclining on a stone, staring wistfully at the reader. She's part woman, part dolphin, and entirely imaginary. Historians still argue whether the editors believed the report or simply found it too delightful to ignore. A footnote suggests caution, but the caption reads, "Sketch of the East African water siren. Circa 1843. And so, the hippo becomes history. In her own ridiculous, glorious way. You'd think the story might settle there. One beautifully exaggerated misidentification committed to the archives. A gently delusional group of gentlemen satisfied with their published triumph. And a hippo finally allowed to just be a hippo. But no. Enter the French. It begins with a canoe arriving from downriver. Its passengers powdered in trail dust and boasting the kind of mustaches that say, "We've just invented culture." The French expedition, 3 men, 1 taxidermist, and a crate labeled, "Urgent Bones," makes landfall like they're stepping onto the stage of an opera. Their leader, Captain Lucien de Fontenoy, greets your party with a sweeping bow, then immediately launches into a tale that makes your crew's river romance look positively reserved. "Ah, mes amis," he begins, 1 foot propped on a crate of limes. "You have also seen her. Oui, la Dame du Fleuve. She is real. I kissed her hand. You nearly spit your tea." Turns out, while your expedition was romanticizing hippos, the French were doubling down on aquatic delusion. According to Fontenoy's logbook, an elaborately inked volume bound in crocodile leather, they encountered not 1, but 3 water maidens, all of exquisite proportion and generous temperament. They supposedly surfaced at sunset, sang in unison, and offered rare pearls before diving back into the depths. You ask if there's any evidence. "Mais oui," he says, dramatically producing a wet sock. Apparently, one of the maidens stole his laundry. He interprets this as flirtation. The rest of his team is no more grounded. The taxidermist, whose name you don't catch but whose sideburns deserve their own postal code, claims he collected strands of hair from a dripping stone. When you examine the sample, it looks remarkably like vine fiber soaked in river water. Nevertheless, the French are insistent. They produce sketches, bolder, more risque than Winslow's, depicting figures with improbable curves and slightly feline expressions. One has wings. Another holds a lantern. A third reclines suggestively on a lily pad larger than most rowboats. Your group, for all its prior nonsense, stares in silent awe, or horror. Fontenoy proposes a joint expedition to find the maiden's nesting ground. He believes it lies at the fork of the river where the reeds form a heart-shaped clearing. They live in harmony with the crocodiles. He explains. They ride them. You have so many questions, but no energy to ask them. Instead, you follow along, helplessly, as both expeditions, British and French, launch a unified effort to document aquatic anomalies. You paddle upstream together, 24 men, 6 crates of sherry, 3 harpoons, for scientific purposes, of course, and 1 accordion. Yes, an accordion. Fontenoy insists it's essential for serenading the river. That night, both camps merge, and the fires burn twice as high. Stories bounce between languages, each one wilder than the last. Someone insists they heard the mermaids speak in Latin. Another says one held a mirror. The accordion plays what might be a lullaby or a dirge, it's unclear. Amid this theatrical chaos, you spot something familiar. 2 round eyes in the water, glinting just above the surface. Then a long, tired grunt, and a hippo, visibly confused, rises from the reeds like a curtain call that no one rehearsed. She stares at the gathering. She snorts. And then, in a display of impeccable comedic timing, she turns and defecates in a lazy arc across the current before disappearing with a gurgling splash. No one says a word. Then Fontenoy claps. She mocks us, he says, voice trembling with emotion. She is clever. Whitmore, who has just opened his 3rd bottle of something smoky and dangerous, adds, yes, she's playing hard to get. It becomes clear. This isn't about discovery anymore. It's a duel of dreams. A river-shaped theater in which each explorer projects his own mythology, his own longing, onto the same snorting, half-submerged creature who clearly couldn't care less. There's a historical precedent for this, too. In the early 1800s, rival Dutch and Portuguese expeditions both claimed to have encountered freshwater sirens in Angola, despite the local population insisting they were just female hippos nursing calves. Historians still argue whether these competing discoveries were fueled by rivalry, alcohol, or sheer boredom. Probably all 3. You lie awake late that night, watching fireflies drift lazily through the air while someone snores gently beside you. You hear the accordion again, soft now, playing a tune that sounds vaguely like a lullaby for fish. And you wonder, what is it about these rivers, these nights, these shadows on water, that makes grown men conjure women from mist and mammals? Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's ego. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the quiet, aching hope that something out there, something beautiful and untouchable, is watching back. Hippo or not, the French leave as dramatically as they arrived, with hugs, promises of Parisian publication, and one final performance on the accordion, which they declare was a gift to the spirits of the river. You watch them paddle into the mist like a floating theater troupe. Their expedition logs undoubtedly thicker and less truthful than ever. In their wake, quiet returns, but not for long, because now, the missionaries arrive, 3 of them, actually, in stiff collars, sun-bleached robes, and expressions that say they've been through both spiritual battles and at least one uncomfortable dinner with a tribal chief who kept offering them roasted locusts. They set up their tent with military precision, arrange their portable altar, and begin asking polite but pointed questions about your ongoing fascination with river women. Whitmore, to his credit, tries to explain the scientific basis for the sightings. He offers sketches, maps, and a half-crushed flower he claims once rested on the creature's brow. The lead missionary, Father Matthews, stares at him for a long moment, then gently closes the sketchbook and says, "My son, that's a hippo." The conversation could have ended there. But it doesn't, because Father Matthews has stories of his own. Over a quiet dinner of yam stew and boiled cassava, he begins telling tales he's collected from local converts. And these are not your European-style mermaids. These are older, deeper, stranger. One legend speaks of Mami Muazi, a spirit of the water who walks like a woman but has no feet. She is said to whisper dreams to those who sleep near her river. And sometimes, rarely, appears in the surface of the water, blinking with eyes that hold all the sorrow of drowned kingdoms. Another tale, shared by a woman who passed through this region as a girl, tells of the Pearl-Eyed One, a shimmering figure who offers lost fishermen one wish, and then sinks their boat if they ask for too much. And yet, no one ever describes scales. No seashell bras, no singing, no yodeling from hippo-shaped silhouettes. These spirits are not playful or seductive. They're ancient, elemental. They don't pose on rocks. They don't wave from midstream. They exist to remind people that water is life and death, and that respect is not optional. You sit quietly, absorbing all of this, as Father Matthews lowers his voice and adds, "There are things here far older than our maps. And they don't care what we name them. It's the most unsettling thing you've heard in weeks. That night, you dream of water, not the river you've grown familiar with, but something wider, deeper, filled with faces you almost recognize. They speak no words, but they hum. You wake with sweat on your neck and the sound of frogs calling into the dark." The next day, the missionaries begin a new campaign, not against hippos, but against interpretation. Father Matthews gives a talk about discernment, asking whether explorers might be projecting their own temptations onto the unknown. He uses words like idolatry, vanity, and willful ignorance, which land uncomfortably on ears still echoing with tales of tail flicks and seductive glances. Whitmore, clearly unsettled, defends himself by quoting Shakespeare. Winslow retreats to his tent and begins a new series of sketches, all of them sadder, more abstract, more silhouette than siren. There's a historical echo here. During the 17th and 18th centuries, missionaries often rewrote local myths to match Christian frameworks. Water spirits became demons. River deities became temptress spirits. But in this strange reversal, it's now the missionaries asking for less fantasy, not more. Historians still argue whether that shift represented humility or merely another kind of control. Later, you sit beside a younger missionary named Elias, who speaks quietly, almost apologetically. "It's not that we don't believe in mysteries," he says. "It's just that some mysteries are not meant to be turned into souvenirs." You chew on that for a long time, especially when, that evening, the river offers another visitor. She appears just after sundown, a wide shape gliding through silver. No showy snort, no moon-drenched yawn, just the gentle rise and fall of water displaced by something solid and slow. She stops. You stop. And in the hush, you swear she's watching. The missionaries don't see her. The rest of the camp is asleep. It's just you and Mokabi. She blinks, once, then slides beneath the surface without a sound. No sketch this time, no poem, no debate, only your breath, hanging in the night, and the strange, certain feeling that you've been seen and forgiven. There comes a time in every journey when denial begins to creak under its own weight. When even the best myths start to buckle in the face of a snort, a splash, and a glistening pair of ears poking up from the water like two little accusations. That time has arrived, because Mokabi, yes, her, is now showing up daily. She's done playing coy. She bathes loudly. She stares directly at you while chewing pondweed with the slack-jawed grace of a queen who doesn't care who knows she rules. And she does rule. She controls the rhythm of the camp, the placement of the tents, and the moods of the men, which rise and fall depending on how elegantly she exits the water. There's no room left for ambiguity. She is a hippo, a magnificent, swaggering, mud-encrusted hippo. And now, the expedition must face her for what she is, not a lady of mystery. Not a river muse, but an animal whose diet includes half the jungle and whose bathroom habits are both vigorous and directional. Winslow, to his credit, has begun adjusting his sketches. The tail has grown shorter. The jaw, wider. One version includes visible nostrils. Another, bravely honest, shows her mid-yawn, mid-squat, mid-realism, but not everyone is ready. Barrow clings to a theory that perhaps Mokabi is a morphed entity. A being who appears as a hippo to some, and a siren to those more attuned. He keeps this theory in a leather notebook titled, Notes on Fluid Form. You ask if the fluid form includes flinging dung in a helicopter arc. He does not appreciate the question. Whitmore, meanwhile, has shifted from denial to diplomacy. He calls Mokabi a threshold creature, a symbol of the line between man and myth. Order and chaos. In knowing her, he writes in his journal, we come to know ourselves. You suspect Whitmore is stalling for time while thinking of how to explain all this in the Society's next update. There's precedent. After all, historical documents from 1861 describe a savage mermaid seen in the Limpopo River that turned out to be a hippo with algae on its back. The original report called it a moss-covered goddess. The correction, issued months later, received no attention. Historians still argue whether that was due to embarrassment or the simple fact that the truth is rarely as charming as the story. In your own camp, however, the truth has become too obvious to ignore. Mokabi's tracks are everywhere, big, round impressions in the mud that led from the river to the supply tent and back. She now makes nightly visits. Once, she knocked over the rum crate. Another time, she dragged a rope into the shallows and then abandoned it halfway across the bank like an insult. Still, a few cling to fantasy. They say, she's watching us for a reason. Or, she appears when the air is thick with meaning. Or, that wasn't dung. That was a blessing. You've stopped arguing. Instead, you've started watching her, too, not as a siren or symbol, but as herself. She's graceful in her own way. Confident, not because anyone told her she's mythical, but because she simply is. Her ears twitch like drumbeats. Her body moves through the water like a slow wave remembering where it came from. You realize you never needed her to be a mermaid to admire her. You just needed her to exist. That evening, a soft rain falls, enough to raise steam from the river and make everything smell like wet leaves and something ancient. Mokabi surfaces again, this time near the cooking fire. She hovers in the shallows, half-lidded eyes blinking at the smoke. You sit on a crate, a spoon in one hand, and nod to her. She blinks once, and then, slowly, she turns, submerges, and vanishes into the reeds. No drama, no poetry, just life. Simple, real, and somehow, more miraculous than all the mermaids you imagined. The expedition doesn't call her the Lady of the River anymore. Now, she's just Mokabi, sometimes a nuisance, sometimes a queen, always herself. And when someone back home asks what you discovered out there in the heart of Africa, maybe you'll say it was nothing special, just a hippo. But you'll smile, because you'll know, it was never just a hippo. It was the thing that pulled the fantasy out of everyone, then left it gently on the shore. Steaming, awkward, and very real. The letters arrived 2 weeks later, sealed in wax, stamped with crests, and filled with paragraphs so politely worded they practically sweat tension. One is from the Royal Geographical Society. Another from the Paris Natural History Museum. A third, oddly, from a private collection in Vienna known primarily for preserving mummified cats and unclassified aquatic anomalies. Each one responds to the submitted report of your expedition's now famous encounter. Each one has very different feelings. The Royal Geographical Society, ever the diplomat, praises the poetic clarity of the writing, the boldness of the anatomical sketches, and the evocative quality of the field notes before suggesting, in rather small print, that further investigation might benefit from closer zoological scrutiny and perhaps, ideally, an actual specimen. Whitmore reads this as encouragement. The French, emboldened by Captain Fontenoy's enthusiastic follow-up dispatch, are less restrained. Their reply, written on thick linen paper with what smells faintly of cologne, declares, "We stand in full agreement that La Dame du Fleuve constitutes a new and extraordinary genus. We are preparing a salon exhibition to honor this revelation in the coming season." They also include a poster mock-up, an artistic rendering of a mermaid reclining on a rock. Eyes half-lidded, tail raised just enough to be scandalous. She is, alarmingly, wearing earrings and what appears to be lipstick. The Vienna letter, meanwhile, reads more like a warning. This creature matches several unverified reports already catalogued under the designation Rheinwasserfrau, a known trickster entity believed to cause misdirection, obsession, and scientific ruin. Proceed with caution. Historians still argue whether the Austrians genuinely believed in river spirits or just enjoyed writing threatening letters in dramatic fonts. Either way, the tone is clear. Tread carefully. Back at camp, reactions are mixed. Barrow is elated. "We're a sensation," he declares, swirling a spoonful of lentils like it's champagne. "They'll be painting murals of us by winter." Winslow is more reserved. He's begun a new sketch series titled Retractions and Reveries, each drawing more honest, more grounded. One simply depicts Mokabi standing in a patch of reeds, snout covered in duckweed, tail half submerged. The caption reads, "She never asked to be legend." Whitmore, however, is determined to defend the honor of the original report. "It's not about truth," he explains. "It's about truthiness, about evoking the sense of mystery. Scientific curiosity thrives on wonder. And if that wonder happens to look like a tusked river ballerina, so be it." You point out that Mokabi flung mud at the latrine tent again last night. He nods solemnly. "She has opinions. She is allowed." The camp begins to divide along lines of belief. One group, Team Muse, continues to write sonnets, polish revised sketches, and practice flute melodies in the hope of future sightings. The other, Team Mammal, has taken to referring to Mokabi exclusively as "she who snacks loudly," and insists that the next field report include proper behavioral tracking and a paragraph titled, "Definitely a Hippo." Tensions reach their peak during the midday debate over whether her appearance during moonrise was a ritual greeting or just hot out. That night, after a particularly heated argument about tail curvature, someone suggests a vote. You all gather around the fire. One by one, hands go up. Do you believe she is a spirit? Or a hippo? Do you believe both? Do you just want to go home? The answers are varied. Some raise their hands twice. Some not at all. And somehow, that feels right. Because this isn't about answers anymore. It's about what people see when they look into the shimmer of a foreign river under foreign stars. You recall another debate from history, when European scholars first encountered the platypus. They thought it was a hoax, fur, beak, and webbed feet stitched together. Even when presented with live specimens, they struggled to believe such a creature could exist naturally. Historians still argue whether it was the animal's appearance or the unwillingness to admit ignorance that caused the greatest stir. You suspect the same is happening here. Because Mokabi is real. She's massive, muddy, magnificently uninterested in your theories. And in her wake, everyone sees what they want. A siren, a joke, a warning, a mirror. At sunrise, she appears again. She wades in slowly, the water parting around her like silk. She blinks once, then settles into the mud like a queen resuming her throne. Her ears flick in the wind. She exhales, a long, resigned breath that sounds eerily like a sigh. No one speaks. No one sketches. You just watch. Because sometimes, the most scientific thing you can do is sit still and pay attention to what is, instead of chasing what you wish was there. And Mokabi? She lets you look, just long enough. Then she slips back under the surface. taking the argument, and the illusion, with her. You don't know whether to laugh or groan when the news finally reaches you. A Museum of Merfolk and Fluvial Mysteries has opened in coastal Plymouth, and your expedition's so-called sighting is one of its main attractions. A letter from a colleague back in England, penned in neat, slightly nervous handwriting, includes a brochure. Glossy, illustrated, very confident. Right on the front, from sea sirens to river queens, discover the untold truth of aquatic humanoids. And there she is. Not Mokabi, of course. Not the yawning, mud-coated behemoth with the grace of a capsized sofa. No. This version stands tall, well, half-submerged, with cascading hair, emerald eyes, a glittering tail that shimmers like it's been filtered through 1,000 fairy tales. And, strangest of all, a knowing smirk that suggests she might also sell you scented candles. You pass the brochure around camp. No one says anything for a while. Then Barrow clears his throat. I mean, it's flattering? Whitmore, who's been muttering artistic liberties under his breath for the past 10 minutes, finally explodes. She's wearing pearls. Pearls, he exclaims, and holding a comb. Someone helpfully notes that the comb is made of gold. The museum, you learn, contains more than just a framed copy of your expedition sketches. It also features a pickled specimen in a jar, a mermaid mummy, that looks suspiciously like a monkey glued to the tail of a dried fish. A plaque beside it claims it was found along the banks of a mysterious African river. No further sources are cited. Visitors can also browse the Siren Song audio experience, a room where soft, vaguely choral music plays over the sounds of trickling water and the occasional mystical splash. You try to imagine Mokabi being played to by choral synth pads. She'd probably defecate in protest. What's most remarkable is how quickly the public has embraced the tale. Newspapers run glowing reviews. Children pose beside cardboard cutouts of the River Muse. There's even talk of a traveling exhibit. It's all been curated, softened, sold. Reality, apparently, was never invited. Historians still argue whether museums like this do more harm than good, whether they preserve wonder or perpetuate nonsense. Some say they inspire the imagination. Others say they bury the truth beneath glitter and marketing. Back at camp, opinions vary. Winslow is oddly touched. He says, maybe it's not her, but maybe it's a piece of what she meant to us. Barrow shrugs. They didn't get the tale right. And Whitmore, who once authored a 12-page footnote on aquatic mammal behavior, now refers to the museum as that cursed mermaid gift shop. But none of that seems to matter anymore, because Mokabi continues to visit. Most mornings now, she's visible just past the tree line where the river curves, basking, floating, sometimes yawning so wide her jaw seems to hinge in disbelief at your species. She makes no attempt to flee. She doesn't need to. You sit beside the river one evening, the sun dripping like honey through the canopy, and wonder what she'd think of the museum, of the lights, the labels, the shimmering cardboard versions of herself. Would she be insulted, amused, or simply indifferent, as she is to most things? Perhaps the museum isn't really about her at all. Perhaps it's about you, the need to name, to frame, to decorate the unknown until it resembles something palatable, something safe. You remember a quote Whitmore once scribbled into the margin of his journal, "When the myth becomes fact, print the myth." It was meant as a joke. Maybe, but now it's on brochures, T-shirts, a snow globe. That night, by firelight, you help Winslow carve a small wooden sculpture, your own tribute. It's not beautiful. It's not precise. It has wide hips, stumpy legs, and a tiny pair of protruding ears. There are no scales, no seashells, no smirk, just the truth. You place it on a stone by the river. In the morning, it's gone. No footprints, no drag marks, just a wide smear of mud and a slow, fading ripple on the surface. Years later, long after the expedition has folded up its tents, packed away its field kits, and returned to the land of teacups and lecture halls, you find yourself in a university auditorium. Seated beside a zoologist who looks like he's aged 30 years in 10. He hasn't, of course. That's just the face of someone who's been asked to explain, for the 100th time, why hippos are not mermaids. The presenter clicks to the next slide. And there she is. Your old friend Mokabi. Well, not really. The slide shows a still from the museum exhibit, the glamorized, pearl-draped interpretation of the River Muse, looking like she's just stepped off the set of a fantasy opera and into a tide pool. The audience murmurs in admiration. Phones snap photos. Someone whispers, "She looks so real." You glance at the zoologist, whose eyelid is twitching. Then he clears his throat and begins. What follows is 20 minutes of solid, level-headed explanation about river ecology, the behavior of semi-aquatic mammals, and the long, exhausting history of human beings seeing what they want to see, especially when those wants involve curves, mystery, and the comforting lie that nature secretly wants to flirt with us. He pulls up hippo skulls, outlines manatee migration patterns, lists all the anatomical impossibilities of a mammal having both lungs and gills and operatic vocal cords. At one point, he sighs so hard you think he might lose consciousness. Still, when the lecture ends, hands shoot up. But what if someone says, "There was a species we just haven't classified yet"? Another, "Couldn't they be magical?" The biologist blinks. You lean over and whisper, "Told you so." Historians and scientists continue to wrestle with the legacy your expedition left behind. Some roll their eyes, some quote it in footnotes. A few treat it like a cautionary tale in ethics courses. How not to let your fieldwork be guided by moonlight and rum. Yet the story refuses to die. In part because it's just too good. There's something irresistible about the idea that beneath the murky surface of an African river, a hidden world exists where the laws of taxonomy bend, and a creature both wild and whimsical watches you with understanding. It doesn't matter that it snores, that it flings dung like confetti, that it has the grace of a soggy beanbag chair. The myth is stronger than the mud. And to be fair, it's not just your myth. Cultures around the world still whisper about watery women, figures half seen between waves, with eyes like regrets and laughter like distant thunder. Whether they're sirens or sea witches, river brides or kelpies, they live on in the stories we tell when the sky goes dark and the wind smells like something old. In a recent journal article, a young Kenyan biologist even argued that these stories serve a purpose, that believing in mysterious beings inhabiting the water teaches caution, reverence, even humility, whether or not they exist. She writes, "Their influence is real. You like that. You think Mokabi would too. Because let's face it, if anyone deserves to be treated with reverence, it's a creature who can capsize a canoe, survive in crocodile-infested waters, and still have her image painted in oils by amateur naturalists." You visit the museum one last time, out of curiosity. The exhibit's been updated. The flashy glamour mermaid is still there. But beside her now is a new display, smaller, quieter, a wooden carving. Your carving. The placard reads, "Believed to be the earliest honest depiction of the River Muse, possibly a hippo. Definitely a legend." You smile. You step back. And you let the next group of visitors lean in and wonder. Let them marvel. Let them question. Let them believe, if they need to. After all, every generation deserves its own Mokabi. And she, muddy, magnificent, misunderstood, will wait for them. Just beneath the surface. If there was ever doubt remaining in anyone's mind, Mokabi puts it to rest during what will later be known, affectionately, and with slight terror, as the incident at the banyan tree. It starts innocently enough. The camp is unusually quiet that morning. The fire's crackling. The tea tastes only slightly of mildew. Whitmore is sketching what he calls her contemplative form. Winslow is rewriting his poem titled Ode to the Amphibious Unknown. Then, crash. You all spin to see a supply crate, containing mostly salt, rice, and 4 tins of sardines, sailing through the air like a kicked suitcase. It hits the ground with a thud, bursts open, and showers lentils across the clearing like botanical confetti. And there she is, Mokabi, in full glory, charging straight through the underbrush. Eyes wild, tail swinging like a weaponized pendulum. She barrels toward the river, bowling over the cookware like it insulted her ancestry. Everyone scatters. Someone screams, "Mermaid!" But it's unclear if it's out of irony or blind panic. Barrow dives into a bush. The cook hurls a ladle in confusion. You, frozen between awe and alarm, watch as Mokabi thunders down the slope, dives into the shallows with the grace of a collapsing haystack, and disappears beneath the water in a storm of bubbles and offended birds. It's not just spectacle, it's a statement. She's claiming territory. She's reclaiming dignity. Or maybe she's just annoyed that you called her elegant one too many times. Later, when the dust settles and the lentils are retrieved from several unfortunate places, the camp begins to reevaluate. The romantic fog has lifted. Now she's being referred to, jokingly, but with respect, as the Duchess of Mayhem. The behavior, while dramatic, is textbook hippo, solitary female, territorial, reacts to perceived threats with theatrical aggression. Biologists have documented it again and again. There's a case from the early 1900s of a missionary canoe being split clean in half after drifting too close to a calf. The survivor reported, "The beast rose like an island, then screamed like a devil. He also lost 3 toes." Historians still argue whether the scream was a vocalization or just a very upset gust of breath. That night, you sit by the fire, ankle bandaged from a misplaced sprint, and ask the crew, "Is anyone still writing love poems?" Silence. Then Whitmore, quietly, "Maybe angry poems." Mokabi returns later, less dramatic, floating peacefully near the opposite bank as if nothing happened. You'd almost believe she was a different creature if not for the mud still caked on her back in the shape of a tea tin. She snorts once, short, sharp, like punctuation. You raise your cup in salute. She blinks, then submerges. The next day, Barrow begins recording unambiguous behaviors. He sketches diagrams, noting mud displacement patterns, excrement trajectory angles, and auditory expressions indicating displeasure. It's the most scientifically rigorous the camp has been in weeks. Still, there's something poetic even in this, the way the camp shifts from worship to observation, from awe to awareness. You're not disappointed, you're grounded. The magic isn't gone, it's just real now. Messy, muddy, magnificently real. And maybe that's better, because Mokabi is doing what legends don't: eating, stomping, pooping, asserting dominance over cookware. She's not interested in your stories. She's not beholden to your metaphors. She's just being. You sit by the river's edge with Winslow later, and he confesses he's started a new sketch. One that finally shows her as she is. No romance, no pearls, just skin, teeth, and the river's muscle behind her. Don't show it to the museum, he says. You promise you won't, because Mokabi doesn't belong behind glass. She belongs here, in the mist, in the muck, in the stories told with laughter and a little fear. The next morning, someone finds her tracks again, wide, deep, deliberate. One cuts straight through Whitmore's old poem book, left open on a log. She stepped on it, right on the stanza about her eyes of sorrowful twilight. And that, you decide, is her final editorial note. You'd think that after Mokabi's full reveal, the overturned crates, the flattened poem book, the majestic and entirely unsentimental charge through the camp, everyone would move on. Story closed. Myth debunked. The mermaid, desparkled. But no, stories don't end just because the facts get inconvenient. In fact, the local children have started telling new ones. You first hear them under the banyan tree, where a group of kids gathers every evening like clockwork. One boy, barely 8 and missing his 2 front teeth, spins a tale with wild hand gestures. She comes with the moonlight, leaves her footprints in the clay, and eats all the mangoes that aren't properly hidden. He calls her Mama Watu. Says she sleeps in the deep bend of the river and only shows herself when someone sings to her in the wrong key. Which, coincidentally, happens every time Barrow plays his flute. Another girl says the spirit doesn't like brass buttons. Too shiny. She whispers. Makes her sneeze. You ask how they know these things. They shrug. Grandfather told us. And he heard it from a bird. It's easy to laugh. But you realize something important. These stories don't exist to be true. They exist to stay. To make meaning. To shape silence. To fill space where the mind might otherwise wander into worry. And Mokabi? She's become a character in their world, not a siren, not a monster, but a being both feared and adored. She is not the polished mermaid of museum plaques. She is not the beast of biology lectures. She is something in between. Something human and not. Something familiar, but still slippery as river silt. One elder you speak with remembers her differently. He says she's always been there. Says his father warned him as a boy not to swim alone near the mangrove root. Because, the watcher lives there, half in the water, half in the world of waiting. You ask if he means a spirit. He smiles. Sometimes she is. Sometimes she's a hippo. Depends who's looking. Historians still argue whether these kinds of oral traditions arose as safety folklore, tools for managing behavior and keeping children from danger. Others insist they are expressions of grief, reverence, or echoes of older animistic beliefs about the aliveness of the land itself. You don't argue with any of it, because the stories make more sense than any footnote ever could. That night, you hear laughter near the fire pit. The children have drawn Mokabi in the dirt, a rounded figure with a wide mouth, 2 tiny ears, and a string of mangoes around her neck. Someone stuck a feather behind her ear, like a crown. They've named her Queen of the Big Belly. And when the moon rises, one of the kids bows toward the river and says, "Good night, Mama Watu." It's not a joke. It's not a superstition. It's respect. And you realize, the myth never needed to be scientifically valid. It only needed to mean something. To explain the unexplainable. To give shape to fear. To turn danger into something with a name. Because once something has a name, you can speak to it. You can greet it, laugh at it, ask it to please stop stealing the mangoes. Mokabi, of course, remains indifferent. She appears now and then, mostly during dusk, eyes reflecting orange from the firelight. She watches from the reeds. She floats near the boat launch. Once, she knocks over a water pail with the precision of a veteran mischief maker. But she never leaves. And neither does the legend. In a year, some of the children will etch her into tree bark. In 5, someone will start carving amulets. In 10, a traveling storyteller will turn her into a parable about greed or humility or not cutting down the wrong tree. She will grow horns in one version, wings in another. She will be beautiful. She will be terrifying. But she will remain. And isn't that what myths are for? Not to prove anything. Not to win arguments. But to last. You sit at the river one last evening. The water smooth as silk. The jungle humming like it knows a secret. Mokabi surfaces briefly. No drama. No parade. Just a glance. Like she's checking that you've learned what you needed to. You nod. And she slips beneath the surface. Unbothered. Unimpressed. Undeniably still there. You've packed your things. The tents are down. The notebooks filled. The final sketches stowed in leather sleeves that smell of river mud and drying glue. The camp is quieter now, less frantic. Less crowded with speculation. There's a softness to the air. As if the land itself is exhaling after weeks of being watched too closely. You sit by the water's edge one last time. Boots unlaced. Sketchpad closed. And you ask yourself, why did we believe it? Not just you, but all of you. The explorers. The artists. The French with their accordion sonatas. The missionaries who swore they saw spirits. The biologists who sighed but still watched the water a second too long. Even the children, now retelling tales under banyan trees with glints in their eyes that sparkle like the surface of this very river. The answer isn't in the hippo. It never was. It's in the wanting. The gentle ache that creeps in when the world feels too small. The yearning for something other, something beautiful, wild, and wholly disinterested in your maps and measurements. The river offered an invitation. And you accepted it. Because what if, just what if, the world is still capable of surprise? What if all the cataloging and classifying and cross-referencing can't touch the part of you that still whispers in the dark? Maybe. Historians still argue whether 19th century explorers truly believed in their own myths. Or whether they simply pretended long enough to convince themselves. Some say the harshness of the terrain demanded a counterweight, something soft, alluring, untamed. Others suggest it was ego. The need to find what no one else had found. Even if it meant seeing a woman where there was only water and wishful thinking. But you think it's simpler. You think it's hope. Not the loud, banner-waving kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that rests at the bottom of the teacup. In the silence between songs. In the way a ripple on a still river makes your breath catch. It's the hope that maybe the world is stranger than it seems. That maybe there's more. So when you saw her, Mokabi, rising like a muddy poem from the shallows, you weren't just looking at a hippo. You were looking at the space between fact and meaning. The flicker between realism and reverence. And for a moment, you believed. Because belief isn't always about being right. It's about being willing. Willing to let a shape become a story. To let a splash become a hymn. To let a creature known for dung flinging and yawns become, somehow, a reflection of something inside you. Something tender. Something wild. And something that no museum plaque or zoology paper could fully explain. Even now, with your bag packed and your boots tied, you hesitate. Because the story doesn't want to be finished. It wants to linger. Like steam on the water. Like laughter in the reeds. Like the look in her eyes that night, half curiosity, half indifference, and entirely unforgettable. You smile. And you believe. Just a little. Not because you have to. But because you can. You leave before dawn. The river is still. Hushed in that velvet hour before the birds begin their daily arguments. The boat rocks gently as you step aboard. And the oars creak like old bones stretching. Behind you, the last smoke trail from the fire pit curls up toward the canopy. Fading into the gray morning like a memory that's already learning how to forget. No one speaks much. Not because there's nothing to say, but because everything has already been said in sketches. In footsteps. In ripples. And maybe, just maybe, in that one long sigh Mokabi gave before disappearing the night before. As if she too was releasing something heavy into the water. You watch the shoreline slip by. Trees casting reflections so perfect you can't always tell which is the world and which is its dream. You pass the spot where you first saw her. Not the museum version. Not the pearl-draped fantasy from pamphlets and parlors. Her. Big. Blunt. Present. Imperfect. Real. And that's the part that sticks. Because she didn't need to be beautiful to be unforgettable. She didn't need to be mysterious to command wonder. She simply had to be there, snorting, stomping, drifting along the current like it belonged to her. Which, of course, it did. It always did. Historians will keep arguing. Poets will keep writing. Museums will keep gluing things together and giving them names. But you'll remember the silence. The way the river held its breath each time she surfaced. The way no one dared to speak until she was gone. And how, for all your logic and science and late-night debates, a small part of you will always wonder, was there more? Maybe she was just a hippo. Maybe she was a myth. Or maybe, in the strange, muddy alchemy of that expedition, she became something else. Not because she changed, but because you did. Blank. Underscore, blank. So now, as your own breath slows and your thoughts begin to drift, Let yourself return to that river, not as a scientist, not as a skeptic, but simply as someone floating, watching. Feel the canoe rock beneath you. Gentle and slow. Hear the soft slap of water against wood, the distant hum of insects, the occasional drip from an oar blade rising and falling like a heartbeat. The shore fades from view. All that's left is mist. And in that mist, shapes move, not sharply, not clearly, but just enough to stir something quiet in you. You don't need to name them. You don't need to believe or disbelieve. Just let them be. Let the river carry your mind gently now. Into that half place between waking and sleep. Let it wrap around you like reeds brushing past your fingers. Let the silence grow long and safe. And if, in that silence, you see her, wide-eyed, half smiling, drifting just beneath the surface, don't be afraid. She's not there to pull you under. She's just passing through. Like a story. Like a dream. And you are part of both now. Good night.